Welcome back to another episode of the Introduction to Insect Taxonomy. This is part 16, and today we're going to be talking about the stoneflies. If we zoom in onto our cladogram here, and we can talk about where we've been and where we're going. We've already talked about the Antennae. These are the insectoid-like pre-insects, so they're not actually insects, but they're closely related, and they share a lot of the characteristics of the insects. Then we have the very primitive apterous insects. These are the insects without wings, so without wings. The Archeonace and the Zygentoma, so these are like the silverfish and the bristletails. And then we've also already talked about the Paleoptera. These are the primitive winged insects who can't fold wings. So they can't fold their wings. These are the mayflies and the dragonflies. So the Ephemeroptera, mayflies, odonata are the dragonflies and the damselflies. So they have an aquatic immature stage and a flying adult stage, and are defined by their relatively large bodies, many veined wings, which they can't fold behind them. After the Paleoptera, we enter the Neoptera, the new wings. I can't spell today. Neoptera. These are the insects that are capable of folding their wings behind their backs. And this is a major evolutionary step. Now they can safely tuck their wings behind them. They can fold their wings up sometimes like a paper fan. And it's a huge improvement for them. And the first set of these that we're going to be talking about will still be hemimetabolists like the Ephemeroptera and the odonata. And by hemimetabolists, I mean they don't go through a complete metamorphosis. Hemimetabolists. They go through a partial metamorphosis, so the immature looks a lot like the adult, but as they mature, they grow. They sprout wing buds or wing pads, and then those wing pads develop into full wings on the final molt. They frequently share a lot of the same physical characteristics. Sometimes they share the same environment or food source. And then the more advanced, as we go on, these down here are the holometabolous insects. Those are insects that go through a full metamorphosis. So the first group that we're going to talk about is here. These are the stoneflies, the Plecoptera. And these share a lot in common with the Ephemeroptera and the odonata, besides the fact that they look, because they can fold their wings behind their back, they definitely have a different looking wing structure. But they are also partially aquatic. Their nymphal stage, or their naiad stage, because they're aquatic, are required to live in fresh water, and then the adults emerge from the water. The final juvenile stage will crawl up to land and do a final molt and emerge with full wings. And then they spend the majority of their time around the water as adults, where they will mate and lay more eggs. And they're not particularly good flyers, so they don't really, fly a long distance like you would see with the odonata, or capable of flying long distances. So what to know about the Plecoptera, or the stoneflies? There are 670 plus species in the United States and Canada, so North America, north of Mexico, scattered across 100 or more genera. But worldwide, there's about 3,400 species and 300 genera scattered across 18 families. Like I said before, they're hemimetabolists. They are winged, but they're Neoptera wings, so they can fold them behind themselves. And they're very common around fresh water because they are dependent on it for reproduction. The adults, which in this drawing here, are mandibulate, so they have chewing mouth parts. They have mandibles, so they are rarely, when the adults feed, they are capable of chewing, but not all of the adults feed. They have these long antennae, which are called filiform, because it kind of looks like long cyndracles kind of tapering away. They have very large eyes, similar to the mayflies and the dragonflies. They have several ocelli, which are those simple eyes. Let me change colors here. Those simple eyes that they have on the back of their head, which aid them in flying. That gives them some vision over their heads. The wings are large and membranous. Sometimes they're dark in color, and sometimes they're more clear or green shaded. The hind wing tends to be wider than the forewing, although sometimes the forewing is longer, and that is because the forewing will completely cover the abdomen in the adults and will extend, back here. The abdomen tends to be ten-segmented, although there are sometimes little vestigial segments on the end. Long legs, widely separated. The adults are partially recognizable because of this ladder-like pattern that you see here on their forewings, where you have many cross veins kind of lining up, so it kind of looks like a ladder. That's pretty unique for the group. But if you are collecting in the water, you will find nymphs. And this is now this is a drawing of one of the nymphs, kind of a quintessential stonefly larva. Again, they have mandibles. They do chew, and they are omnivorous. Depending on the group, they will either feed on detritus or plant matter, or they will hunt other insects and small invertebrates in the water. They have gills. That's what you see, these little tufts located behind the head, behind the legs. Sometimes they'll be on the end of the abdomen, and the distribution of the gills is just dependent on the group. They again have these long filiform antennae, and they also have cerci, which the adults have smaller cerci generally, but cerci are present on the adults and the nymphs. How you would distinguish this group from, say, a mayfly, which if you will remember from the mayfly section, the mayfly nymphs look very similar to this, is that the stoneflies have 2 cerci, and the mayflies have 3, and the stoneflies have 2 claws, and the mayflies have 1. Additionally, the mayflies tend to have their gills located on the sides of the abdomen here, whereas the gills of the stoneflies are kind of scattered around. So the nymphs have up to 33 aquatic instars in the water. So an instar is a stage of development between molts. So they can molt 33 times, up to 33 times before they emerge as an adult. Frequently with these aquatic insects, these primitive aquatic insects, the number of molts is variable and apparently has something to do with environmental factors, but it's not entirely understood. And then the wing pads will sprout out on the thorax here and here when the nymph is about half grown. So in the early juvenile stages, you won't see any nymphal wing pads. Generally speaking, these guys hang out underneath the stones in a stream, hence the name. And they are fairly flat-bodied, so they can kind of slide underneath the stones without getting trapped or without, fish finding them. So if you are searching for these in the water, you will likely have to pick up stones or like do kick netting, where you're disturbing the bottom of the stream or the river and kind of knocking them loose in order to find them. So the Plecoptera are an interesting evolutionary group because they are pretty well divided between 2 suborders. And today we're not going to talk about all of the individual families in North America, North Mexico, or the common families, things like that, because there are a lot of things going on in that group. So I'm going to need to do a separate presentation just on the families. But for the suborders, these are the suborders. There are 2 big ones. There's the Arctoperlaria and the Arctoperlaria. And as the name suggests, one is Arctic, one is Antarctic, and by that I don't mean that they're living in the Arctic. I mean that they are either in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, it's a very clear distinction. And there's only a little bit of overlap where some of the ones from the northern hemisphere are now slowly moving into the southern hemisphere. But there is no backwards movement. So all of the Arctoperlaria are in the southern hemisphere. So I've actually never collected any of those because I haven't collected in the southern hemisphere. But the Arctoperlaria, if you're collecting in the United States, all of them will be in this group. within that group, these are called infraorders. It's just another subdivision. Um, there are two major subdivisions, the Euholonatha and the Cistellonatha, and we'll talk about those a little bit today. What is interesting with this division occurred a long time ago. So if you go back 200 million years ago, you don't have the full continental drift yet that we see today. So you actually have two large continents, Laurasia and Gondwana, and the Arctoperlaria are all located down here, and they evolved spreading between these land masses. And the Arctoperlaria occurred up here, and they evolved spreading between these land masses. So you have North America, Europe, and Asia. And down here you have South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. So that is how the distribution occurred. And now that North and South America are connected, you do see some migration down through Central America into South America from the Arctoperlaria, but we haven't seen any of the opposite occurring. So that's kind of a strange sort of occurrence with this group where this division still exists. They haven't, I guess because they're not great flyers maybe, or because they're so restricted to needing fresh water or moving fresh water that they haven't intermixed yet. So now let's talk about not the suborders, but the infraorders, so like the Euholonatha and the Cistellonatha, and the things that kind of group them together. So these are all, today what I'm going to talk about are all Arctoperlaria. So this group here, we're just going to be talking about this group today. The Arctoperlaria have a number of families as well, and these are all kind of grouped together based off of certain anatomical muscle, or what would you say, muscle, really existence. This group has more muscles than this group, basically. And they have more unique muscles that aren't present in the Arctoperlaria. And additionally, they have a number of unique sensory cells that are not present in the Arctoperlaria. The Arctoperlaria are probably not this closely related. It's probably paraphyletic, so there's likely a group that comes off here, and it's this whole group. But what things that they have in common is they mostly all, or it's very common for them to drum. So they can they beat different substrates in order to communicate with each other for finding mates and things like that. But there are a number of different groups within the Arctoperlaria, so they have different things in common. The first group are in the Euholonatha, or is the Euholonatha, and that's made up of 4 families: the Capniids, the Leuctriids, and we'll talk about this next time. The different families in this, but this is the group is the Euholonatha. And this is just an example. The Neumarids are an example of this group. This is one of the adults. Everything in this group tends to be herbivorous or kind of shred detritus in the water in order to feed. The first instar nymphs don't feed. They prefer cool streams, generally smaller streams and creeks. The adults are capable of feeding, but they don't always. And they generally emerge in the early spring or the late winter during the day. And they're most active during the day. The females only lay eggs once, and the eggs are often very unique looking, very sculptured. So this is an example of the morphology of that group. They tend, this is kind of what you would expect from, what would you say, a quintessential Plecopteran, where you have these darker brown wings, a brown body, large eyes. This is the Neumorid nymph, and again, it's kind of the quintessential stonefly nymph. These were the wing pads that I was talking about. This is an older nymph, so it's already beginning to sprout its wings. Like I said before, these prefer cool small streams where they will live under the rocks. And it's more of a stout-bodied, quintessential body shape for the Plecopterans. When we talk about the Cistellonatha, which is what this is a representative of, this is Cistellonatha. The smaller group is the Perloidea. Cistellonatha. This is the other major division. They are, like the chloroparalids, are this lighter green color. They tend to be carnivorous or omnivorous. Their first instars do feed, unlike the previous group. The adults do not eat before mating. They often are in warm water, so they prefer warm as opposed to cool streams. And they are more common during the summer and at night. So very different from this other group, which is cool streams, prefer more active in the early spring. They prefer the daylight. This group is the exact opposite. The females will mate multiple times and lay eggs multiple times, unlike this other group. So you can already start seeing a difference. This is what their nymphs look like. And if you compare the chloroparalids, this is a Cistellonatha with the nymphs of the Nemourids, you can already see kind of a different body design. And then within the Cistellonatha, there is another superfamily, the Pteronarcoidea, which is represented here, kind of a lighter color. Again, they tend to be herbivorous, like the first group, and they have a lot in common with the first group. They have a lot of the same habitats, warm streams, cold streams. The adults might not feed. The females only lay eggs once. But they have this particular group, the Plecopteralids, have a very different body structure, as you can see here. These much wider thoracic noda, which will eventually develop into the wing pads. But again, you can kind of start seeing the difference here, even though we're not going to go into the individual families today. You can already see that there's a different body structure. And I think I want to cut that off here because there are a number of families that I do want to talk about next time when we go into the actual families of the Plecoptera. There's, let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 families that I want to go over next time. So you'll be able to see more of the differences between the families when we go into that later.